All right, y'all. So let's say that you've decided that you want to go ahead and incorporate interviews into your podcast, which I always think is a really outstanding idea. It's a great way of showing that you've really interacted thoroughly with your subject matter, and that you've really put the time and the effort into seeking outside voices. Now, it's not an absolute requirement for this assignment, because there is another option for you to earn an A grade, but using interview materials for the purpose of trying to produce something that sounds as professional as possible, I always think is a really great idea. So I'm going to show you how to incorporate an interview sound file into your podcast real quick. And I'm cheating a little bit here because as you can see, I've already got a little sound file that I have put together. Now, this is sort of presuming that you've already gone through the interview, you've listened to your recording of it, and you've already picked out the portion that you want to use for your podcast. You've snipped it, you've edited it. That includes taking away any sort of background noise. So we're kind of starting from the position of already having an interview file that's good to go. All right. So I just want to mention that you don't want to skip those steps. Make sure that you do all the editing steps that you did with this file that you did with your dialogue. That's going to be very, very important. All right. So with that being said, the way that you go about it, it's very, very easy, of course. First things first, you do want to rely on the timeline up here to determine the length of the interview materials that you want to use. As a general rule, you typically want your interview file to be about 30 to 45 seconds for each interviewee. You don't want to go much longer than that if you can help it at all, because after all, this is your podcast. It's your voice that the audience wants to hear most of all. So again, having interviews is great, but you do want to limit the amount of time that is allotted to them. All right, so let's say that you've got your interview file. It's good to go. Sounds great. It's exactly what you want to include as far as the wording is concerned. Now all you have to do is first things first is you have to go ahead and place it where it is supposed to be in the body of the podcast. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the Zoom navigation tool. And I mentioned, y'all, that I was cheating a little bit. This is the practice dialogue file that I put together earlier. So it was not made specifically to include an interview file. So just remember that if you're going to use an interview, then when you are scripting your podcast, you're going to want to include some sort of introduction, some sort of lead into the interview. You don't want it to go just straight from your dialogue to another person speaking. That's going to mess with the continuity and just not make it sound very good. So remember that if you're using an interview file, make sure that you are contextualizing it, giving an introduction to who's going to be doing the speaking and how they are relevant to your subject matter. So all I'm showing you here is how to place the sound files and how to move them around properly. All right. So again, we've got our dialogue file here. I went ahead and moved the music file down here. I bumped it down one further, and as you can see, I've retitled that for music. I made this track here the interview track because I like to have the dialogue and the interview right above one another. I think that makes them a lot easier to work with. So let's go ahead and let's play this.
Pauses. Kind of like that.
All right. Well,
As you listen to this spot.
Okay, all right. So obviously we've got it at the spot where we want it to be. Once again, don't have a lead in here. This is just the spot where I have chosen to include it.
Kind of like that.
All right. So now obviously what I want to do here is in multi-track session, I want to go and click on the razor tool. All right. And before I say kind of like that, that's where I want it to be cut. All right. And I'll tell you what, let's click back on that move tool so that we're not making another cut. We don't need one. We're going to go and condense the view of our podcast. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the remainder of the dialogue file and, of course, the credits, and we're going to move it all over at once. And we're just going to use the cursor here to go and highlight both of them. Click, drag to the end of the dialogue file. Let's go and listen to that now.
Of sounds that you'll recognize, a couple of ums, and some awkward pauses.
All right, well, since the awkward pause.
All right. So we don't have the interview competing with the dialogue anymore, but it is competing with the music. So obviously I have to put this in there as well. Just like you did with the dialogue, this has to be tagged properly so that Adobe Audition will know to duck the music against it. So go ahead and once you have this highlighted, your interview file, head over here to Essential Sound, click the dialogue button. And as you can see, it's got that same tag that you have up here for the rest of your dialogue. Now let's hear it, and the music should be ducked both against this and this. We shouldn't have any kind of awkward transition going on.
Patches of silence at the beginning and ending, a few interruptive sounds that you'll recognize, a couple of ums, and some awkward pauses.
All right, well, since the awkward pause has been done away with, this sounds like a good opportunity to go ahead and introduce a bit of interview materials into this podcast. So this is just to remind you that interviews are a great way of increasing the ethos of your podcast by showing just how much you have thoroughly engaged with your subject. You just want to make sure that you include them in a way that is both effective and ethical. Provided that you meet those two requirements, you're going to do just fine.
Kind of like that. As you listen to...
All right, very good. All right, so yep, we've got the interview file. All we had to do was use the razor tool to make one quick snippet here, move the rest of the dialogue content, that included the credits there at the end, move them over a little bit to make room for the interview, make sure that this is properly tagged, and we are good to go. And you have just included an interview file in your podcast.